Good morning. I had already had this lesson selected, and then while P.J. Anderson was here giving us our gospel meeting last week, he brought up a few points out of the Sermon on the Mount, but I think that we're going to be looking at things in a slightly different manner than what P.J. was looking at. So we're going to be looking at the Sermon on the Mount. And I think one of the issues that people have in understanding the Sermon on the Mount is that we miss that there is a follow-through. There is one key point that Jesus tries to make throughout the entire text. And it was a point that he needed everyone listening to him, every one of his disciples, to hear. If we look at how this starts off, when we look at the Sermon on the Mount, if you'll start with me in Matthew chapter 5, he sort of sets up for us what the rest of what he's going to talk about precisely. So if you'll start with me in verse 3 of Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus sets up an idea that is going to follow him really throughout his entire ministry, which is that when there are those who bring the truth, like Jesus, when there are those who are presenting the truth to those who don't want to hear it, then you're going to find yourself an enemy. But there's an important point that he wants all of us to understand. He tries to prove to us two things that really go together. The first and most important, this is the true follow-through of the Sermon on the Mount, is that your heart is what truly matters. And I capitalized the law here because in parts of this, he's going to focus on the law of Moses. Now, as he's going to point out in other parts of his ministry, does law suddenly not matter? Does the fact that God actually gives us a set of standards by the way we live our life, does that suddenly not matter? Of course not. But what matters most is where your heart is. And the second thing that he's trying to prove here is that the Pharisees, we'll get to who the Pharisees are here in a minute if you're unfamiliar with that term, the Pharisees are not the pinnacle of righteousness. Now, you're going to find he doesn't really mention the Pharisees here very much in the Sermon on the Mount. However, you find who they are sprinkled all throughout this text. And these two things go together. The reason why the Pharisees are not the pinnacle of righteousness is because their heart is not in its proper place. The Pharisees were a sect of what's called the Sanhedrin, or the Jewish council. And they were what we might call the conservative side of the Jewish leadership. And they were sort of fundamental in their way of thinking. And in so doing, they had gotten so fundamental that they had created the traditions that they thought best helped them follow the law. They made them law. And so for a majority of the Jews, man, if I could be a Pharisee, that would be the pinnacle of righteousness. If anyone is going to heaven, it's the Pharisees. And Jesus, throughout his ministry, points out that is the furthest from the truth. Again, because of what they had done, because of where their heart is. Law is important. But obedience without your heart, it doesn't matter what the law states. And that's what Jesus is going to prove to us. We're not going to read the entirety of the text here. We're going to pick out select passages here. But this is what you find all throughout the Sermon on the Mount. Your heart is what really determines your righteousness. Yes, you need to follow what God has told you to do. You need to obey the commandments that God has put in place. But this is what the Israelites had missed. Obedience without the heart is nothing. This is something that even David, one of the Israelites' greatest heroes, said, "It is obedience and not sacrifice that you desire." As he's writing to God, I know it's that you want obedience from the heart, not obedience to the letter. But of course, what did David do throughout his whole life? Try to obey the letter. These two things are important, but without one, you can't have the other either. And he's going to show that the Pharisees have strayed so far from God that they are actually dragging everyone down with them. My father, when he was teaching a high school devotional for us when I was in high school, we were living in Virginia, and we had a very sturdy coffee table in the area where we were all studying around in our home, and Dad had a few of us, one at a time, climb up on the coffee table, and then he said, "Okay, now I want you to try to pick someone, you pick whoever, and try to pick them off the floor and pull them up onto the coffee table." And of course, every single one of us goes tumbling off the coffee table because that's very difficult. It requires an immense amount of strength to pull someone up. And he had a couple of different points to that illustration. But one of the things he was pointing out is you can't try to pull people up with you. When people have lost their grip on God, they are going to pull you down with them. And this is actually true. This is one of the, I used to be a lifeguard and a swim coach. If you don't know this, if someone is drowning, unless you have the training to save them, you need to get away from them. And that is very counterintuitive because we want to help. And it's great. We're so glad that you want to help. But if you are not equipped for saving someone who is drowning, you have to get as far away from them as possible. Because they will pull you down, and now we have 2 dead bodies to fish out of the water. If you are equipped, then fine, do whatever you can to save them. But this is what happens when people stray from God, then no matter what you do, and Jesus proves it, no matter what you do to try to get them up to you, they're more likely to drag you down with them. But guess how easy it is to pull someone up onto the coffee table when they're standing on their feet. And they can take a step up with you while you're holding onto their hand. And that's when someone has a heart. They may not be on the coffee table yet, but then as soon as they follow the commandments of God, all they have to do is take one small step. And they're on the same plane. And this is what Jesus is going to show us. Again, we're not going to be able to go through the entire text this morning, I don't believe. But we are going to start, we're going to go through and we're going to see how the heart plays out throughout all of this text. And we already read the first 12 verses. What Jesus is trying to prove to us is what the heart looks like for a citizen of heaven. Those who are part of the kingdom. And many of these, as I'm sure those of you who have sat in a church service before, have heard preachers talk about how some of these are counterintuitive. Blessed are those that mourn. Blessed are the gentle. Some of these, the world says, man, when you behave like that, everyone's just going to walk all over you. Everyone's just going to trample all over you. You're not going to be able to stand up for yourself. That's not what God is looking for. God is looking for the heart of someone who can be part of the kingdom. And that's thinking about things outside of ourselves. I am less worried about someone walking all over me when I know that I have a future to go to someone who will never walk all over me. I have somebody that I can go to who I never have to worry about leaving me behind. And so when we see this laid out, it might look a little strange to us at first. Because notice what he doesn't say. Blessed are the happy. Did you notice that? Blessed are the ones who take control. Blessed are the ones who help themselves. And these are the standards by which many people live their lives. Blessed are those who, by all means, achieve their goal. That's not what he says here. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those that mourn, that are gentle, who need righteousness. That's the idea of hunger and thirsting. I need it. The merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, the persecuted. These seem to be things that we would not associate with heaven or the kingdom of heaven. But the great thing is he doesn't stop there. He takes these ideas and starts walking through them. And he shows that this is what a citizen of the kingdom looks like. And guess what happens when you go out in the world? Guess how the world is going to treat you. And guess how you should treat the world. And so he shows how disciples ought to reach out. We ought to be salt. Verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? He goes into verse 14, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Verse 16, let your light shine. This is the way that we communicate our heart. The heart that is fit for the kingdom, from verses 3 through 12. And then in verses 21 through 48, it's a very large section here. The biggest out of any of the subsections that we're looking at here. What we find is the law and how our heart ought to respond to the law. Verse 21, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable or guilty before the court. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. And whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. And you find these all throughout this section. You've heard the ancients were told, or you've heard it said. And then Jesus says, but I say to you. And then he pinpoints the heart. That's what he keeps doing, right? Yes, don't commit murder. That's important. But your heart took that leap a long time ago if you're already getting to murder. Your heart took that leap when you began to hate your brother. Later on, he goes into verse 27. You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And notice what he's pointing out here. Look, you've been told, here's the line, don't cross it. And Jesus says, but I say to you, stay away from the line. Your heart should want to be back here, not up there. Your heart shouldn't be one step off from going over the edge. Well, I didn't murder him. Great. Thanks for putting the bar on the ground and stepping over it. You know what? Even some people set the bar on the ground and somehow dig under it. That's not the way our heart is supposed to be. Our heart should want to be away from that line. So much so that in verse 29, if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. Your heart should want to be so far from the line of sin that proverbially cutting off body parts so that I don't sin is a better alternative than sinning. That's how much I should desire righteousness, right? Isn't that what he said earlier? Hunger and thirst for righteousness. Sometimes people, when they've been lost out in the wilderness or lost at sea, that sometimes they go feral because they're hungry. And what he's showing here is you don't have to necessarily go feral, but there are great lengths that we should go in order to keep ourselves from sin. Verse 31, it was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, everyone who divorces his wife makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Look, you've heard it said that this is all right, but I say to you, God hates divorce. That before going to divorce, maybe there are other avenues. Maybe there are other things to consider. Maybe, proverbially, I'm going to have to cut off my right hand. Well, I guess this one's my left. I'm going to have to cut off my left hand in order to make the relationship with my wife what it ought to be. And so this idea of the law is important to follow, but your heart should be way back here. Following the law should not be a struggle because you're far away from the line of sin. You're focused on the things that may not inherently be sin, but can lead you to the edge. Maybe that's where our heart should be focused on. It's not, well, is that a sin? Is that the only question that the Bible ever answers? Okay, here's sin. Boom, 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 boom. There you go. There's stuff. Take it, memorize it, laminate the card, keep it in your wallet. You're good to go. Is that what the Bible teaches us? No. That there's so much deeper to the understanding of sin. There might be things that are not inherently in and of themselves sin, but can lead us to sin. Hebrews chapter 12 says, let us lay aside every sin and every encumbrance that so easily ensnares us. Notice that there are things that may not be sins, but they still ensnare us and cause us to look away from God. And that's what Jesus is trying to point out here in the rest of the chapter. And here's where I think we get the first real dig, if you will, at the Pharisees. Look, the Pharisees are going to sit over here and they're going to spout the law to you. But what they have forgotten is where their heart needs to be when they spout the law to you. They're going to tell you, yeah, as long as you don't murder, you're going to be fine. But that's not the right way to teach. That's not what to teach people. How about we start with not hating your brother, and that way we're never going to come close to the line of murder. And this is what Jesus will point out, not here but in other places, where, look, the Pharisees have forgotten long ago very important points of the law, and they've gotten so lost in the minutia that they forgot about the most important parts of the law. And they've forgotten it because their heart is not where it needs to be. It's not enough to not murder. It's not enough to not commit adultery. It's not enough to not steal. It's not enough to not lie. It's about where your heart is before you've gotten to that point. And then he goes into chapter 6 to let's dig a little bit deeper. How about when you're giving? How about a heart for giving? Beware, verse 1 of chapter 6, of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. Who are the hypocrites doing this in the synagogues and in the streets? It's the Pharisees. The Pharisees were ones, there are actual exo-biblical accounts of Pharisees marching with trumpets, with coronets, while they're going out into the city square to start giving. Look at me, I'm about to do something real good. And God says, you know what? They have their reward. They've got the adoration of hundreds, if not thousands. They've got that. It can't follow them when they die. That's their only reward. Their heart is not where it needs to be. Verse 3, when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so your giving will be in secret. And your Father who sees what you've done in secret will reward you. When I want to do good, how about you do good and you walk away? Instead of waiting for the adulation and the thank yous and the handshakes and the claps on the back. Why don't you just do what you're supposed to do? And again, where's the heart there? I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do because I know God is watching. That's not meant to be a boogeyman type scenario. God's always watching. God is wanting to see you do good. God wants to reward you when you do good. And so He's watching. Look, that man or that woman did good and then they walked away. They left twice the amount of tip that they could have otherwise left. They paid for the person behind them in line at the drive-thru. They mowed their neighbor's yard as well as their own. There are all these things that, when our heart is in the right place, those might seem like small things, but God is looking at you and saying, I'm so proud of you. That's the only adulation we need. In verse 5, he talks about the heart you should have while you're praying, which goes along with the heart that you have giving to the poor. My prayers are not meant for other people to say, good prayer. When I want people to tell me, oh, that was such a good prayer, you probably didn't pray a good prayer. Because you weren't talking to God. You just wanted praise for your prayer. It might have been the most eloquent piece of literature you have ever given in your entire life. And God goes, man, you weren't even talking to me. That was a waste. Not only should we have a heart for giving and what that looks like, and a heart for prayer, but a heart for forgiveness. Remember what he said earlier, blessed are the merciful. Right? For they shall obtain mercy. And we know that God says that mercy triumphs over judgment. And here, and it's funny because it seems to be kind of thrown in at the end of his model prayer. Verse 12, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And then he finishes his prayer, and then he goes back to it in 14 and 15. For if you forgive others their transgressions, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. And if you do not forgive others, then your Father will not forgive your transgression. This is actually something the Pharisees were quite known for. They were known for being ruthless when they were sinned against. They were known to take matters into their own hands in a very violent manner, if Paul wasn't enough of an indication to you, or Jesus' own crucifixion. But those were par for the course for the Pharisees. They would do whatever they could to get back at you for harming them. That's not forgiveness. And so when we forget how to forgive, then our heart is not ready for receiving the forgiveness ourselves. And Jesus has parables about this. There's a parable of a man who owes his master 10,000 talents. It's hard to know exactly where. Some estimates are that was a year's wage. Some estimates that was 10 years. Some estimates that was 100 years' wage. Either way, let's say it's a year. 10,000 years worth of payment. And there's no way you're going to be able to pay that. And then he goes, this slave that owes his master forgives him, which is incredible already. Who in their right mind would forgive that much debt? And then he goes to his fellow slave who owes him 100 denarii, which is 1 day's wage, owes him 100 days' wage. That's easily payable. Owes him 100 days, and he throws him in prison because he can't pay it. And the master finds out and punishes him for it. His heart was not ready to receive the forgiveness of the debt that his master forgave him. So then what does the master say? Fine, you can pay back everything you owe too. And then to continue on in this idea, because again, notice how we've sort of had this idea of a humble heart here. And he continues it for fasting. Just like with the prayer and the giving from before, verse 16, whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do. For they neglect their appearance so that they will be noticed by men when they are fasting. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. Notice he keeps bringing that out. They have their reward. They got everybody to notice them, and that was enough for them. They don't want God to notice them. They just want others to notice them. But notice, once again, he's pointing out the hypocrites. And this is, again, what the Pharisees were known for. I'm fasting. Oh, I'm in sorrow. I'm doing this for the Lord. And he says, no, that's between you and God. Leave it between you and God. And this is why I had Matt read the passage here, because this is sort of right in the middle of the text. This is very central to the text, which we're going to have a sermon in the near future about what the idea of chiastic structure is. It's actually quite interesting. I think you'll enjoy it. But with a lot of Jewish literature, the idea that's right in the middle of the text or the discourse is often the most important. And this is really what's true about the Sermon on the Mount as well. Because it's how our heart understands and stores its treasures. When I'm so focused on everybody else looking at me, imagine that all I'm doing is I'm stuffing a trunk full of perishable goods. And I only open it when I get the next thing and I throw it in, but I leave it sitting out in my garage and it's the middle of summer. What's going to happen? Well, that's going to rot. It's going to smell awful. And then eventually it's going to be inedible. But when we store up lasting treasures, when we store up non-perishable items, then guess what? I can go to that chest whenever I need something. And I can take from it and I can find sustenance. And that's what God grants us here. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. You can lose all of that. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, where thieves do not break in or steal. That can't be taken from you. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And then he continues on. Not only is how our heart stores treasure, but it can only do it if it's a pure heart. And remember, that was in the Beatitudes as well, wasn't it? Blessed are the pure in heart. Starting in verse 22, the eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. Right? Doesn't that stand to reason? That's kind of logical. If I'm looking at a light source, then my eye is full of light. And if I'm looking at darkness, then I am missing the light. Right? I mean, that's kind of a duh moment for us. But then what we always want to do is we want to peer into the darkness and squint and do like this and never turn on the light. And then we wonder why I'm knocking my shins on everything. Turn on the light, for goodness sake. Because if our heart is pure, then it is a beacon of light. Remember, that's what he said earlier. We're supposed to be the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. If I'm constantly radiating the light of God, then what room has darkness around me? And a pure heart is one that stores up treasure the way it ought to. But sometimes, in all of our storing up, sometimes there are things that creep in. When our heart suddenly becomes anxious, in verse 25, for this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. Is life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Notice here that Jesus doesn't say, how dare you worry? He gives a gentle reminder Do not be worried. God knows what's going on in your life, and He's providing. And sometimes that's hard for us to see because we're watching our paycheck come in and go out. And I'm the one using my credit card or my debit card, or I'm the one the cash is leaving my hand, and we forget that it is actually God who is providing. He's not magically filling your bank account with cash, but He is providing. And what Jesus goes on to say here is, all of creation gets its sustenance from God. Why can't you? Why can't your heart be prepared to accept the help and the provision that God will provide? But so often that's not good enough. It's not good enough because sometimes it's not right now. Sometimes it's not in the way that I expect. Sometimes it doesn't satisfy my anxiety. Once again, my heart is not in the right place. And then notice how he transitions. For a long time, I felt that the end of chapter 6 into chapter 7 was a bit of a shepherd's crook. Let's yank ourselves into the next point. But that's not true, is it? Start in verse 33, and then we're going to seamlessly go through into chapter 7. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all your needs will be added to you. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. So notice here, he is going to continue on into an idea of personal judgment, judging interpersonally. But notice how it's actually quite seamless. Don't judge that God doesn't know what He's doing. Your heart should be at a place where I'm not concerned about whether or not God is providing. And because of where my heart is and the fact that I judge God in that way, then I turn around and judge my fellow man. And it says, by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Guess what? What if I measure everybody else by the heart of a citizen of the kingdom? What if I judge others by being merciful and pure of heart and hungering and thirsting after righteousness? What happens then to my judgment? I'm not concerned about judging everyone else anymore. Are there times where we can look at each other and say, are we following the Word? I think that that's allowed and even encouraged in the Bible. But for me to pass judgment on God or on anyone else is never my place. And the reason why it's never my place is because my heart can never be in the right place for judgment. It's too easy to find ourselves being hypocritical, looking at the speck in our brother's eye. Can you imagine you're sitting at the dinner table and the person you're with reaches over and says, you just got a little smush right there in the corner of your mouth, and you're looking and they're covered with salad. You're sitting there going, you want to clean that off first? How about you clean yourself up? I'll get this myself, you know? But no, what we do is we look so outward all the time that we're not filling ourselves with light and with judgment. And then he points out here that a heart that is exactly where it needs to be. Again, remember what he said, hungering and thirsting for righteousness. It needs to seek out righteousness. The heart needs to seek for God. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man is there among you when his son asks for a loaf, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he won't give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask him? In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you. For this is the law and the prophets. Seeking after my own well-being means seeking the well-being of other people. Because God will provide. If I'm seeking after God, he will provide. And so then I can spend my time worried about how everyone else is doing. How can I help you? But some people don't get it. Some people take the wrong path. Some people forget what's most important in this life. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction. There are many who enter through it. For those of you who were able to be in our Bible class this morning, we talked about this a little bit, didn't we? There's an overwhelming evidence for God, for his existence, for his care for you. And yet, the reason people enter this destructive and broad way is because they don't see it that way. They've put the blinders on to all the evidence. They look, it's a nice wide path. That path, it's got some brambles. It's kind of narrow. I feel like maybe I could get lost on it. So I'm not going to take that path. Instead of, if they looked a little bit closer, they would see it's actually a well-manicured path. It's actually the path that's going to give them the least amount of trouble. The gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Not because those people are special, but because God has shown them the way. He's going to continue on to talk about the fruit that we bear, the way that our heart then manifests itself. The heart that we've been talking about so far is a rather abstract thing. We only know that our heart is what it ought to be if it has outward signs. Can you imagine your spouse sitting next to you telling you how much they love you, and yet they never do a single thing to prove it? Are you really going to believe them? If I truly love my spouse, then I'm going to show it. Verse 18, a good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then you will know them by their fruits. And guess what? Some people think they're bearing good fruit, and that's such a sad place. And it's a concerning place for me. Is that where I am? Do I think I'm bearing good fruit? Am I the one who says in verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven? Well, if I'm judging inwardly and I'm making sure that my heart is where it needs to be, then that's not talking about me. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? I will declare to them, I never knew you. I never knew you? This is quite a strong thing to say. But it would have been obvious all along if we were honest with ourselves about the fruit that our heart was bearing. And lastly, the heart on the right foundation can overcome anything. And I think that this is back to the beginning. The heart of a citizen of the kingdom of heaven can withstand anything. When we look and say, blessed are the gentle, blessed are the humble, how stupid is that? Well, guess what? I can weather any storm. The bigger your ego gets, the more pain you feel. And so a heart not built on the right foundation, we'll do it a little bit out of order here. Verse 26, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell. If our heart is not in the right place, then we're building on sand. And as soon as we feel pain to our ego, pain to our sense of self, we're going to crumble. But verse 24, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them, notice acts on them, may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Our heart, notice here that a heart that is right with God has heard the words of Jesus and is acting on them. At the beginning I said the law is important. The standard by which we live is still important, but you're not going to follow it the way you ought to without the heart for God. And this is what he's been trying to prove the entire time. You think these Pharisees over here in their fancy dress and they're tearing their clothes whenever they're sad and they're sounding trumpets when they're doing good things. Guess what? Those are not the righteous. For some reason you think they are, but they're not. The ones who are the righteous are the ones who are fleeing from sin, who are relying on God, who are not caught up in petty squabbles and judgments, who aren't worried about where their next meal is coming from. Those are not the righteous. The ones that look to God. The ones that say all will be well. The ones that say, I have enough to work on within myself. Those are the ones that God looks on with pride. Those are the ones that God gives their key to the kingdom. Hopefully this morning, you have heard enough to know that your heart needs to be in the right place. And I would say that you being here is already a step in the right direction. Your heart is exactly where it needs to be right now to listen to what God is telling you. It's not what I'm telling you. I'm not getting some magical message from God right now. But if you have listened to anything that I've read this morning, you know that God is speaking to you. And if your heart is open, then there's a path to follow. And now's the time to take advantage of it. I don't know what's going to happen to you. But if you take advantage of the opportunity you have now, you'll never have anything to regret. You never have to be concerned about your life, what's going on in it. You can focus on God and the relationship that you can have with Him. And it's so hard for people to see that that is the most important thing in anyone's life ever. Because it's not always right in front of me. And to limit your scope like that to me is so sad. That you can't see past the bridge of your own nose to see that there's something better for you out there. This morning, you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to God talk to you Himself. If you already have begun that path, and you're walking down that path, and that broad way is looking pretty nice, well, I can guarantee you, at the end of that broad path is a straight drop. It's a cliff that falls down into the abyss. We are slowly climbing upward. It might be a hard journey. You might start to feel winded. You might have to clutch your back and wonder if you slept on it funny. But once you get to the mountaintop, then you see God. Don't lose heart on that. Don't let your heart be corrupted by this world. Keep your heart true to the Lord. Whatever help you need this morning, now is the time as we stand and sing.